And we're back with Susan Page, Washington Bureau Chief of USA Today and Editorial Director of Atlantic Media, Ron Brownstein. Susan, I want to start with you. Russia, election, Donald Trump. Kellyanne Conway seems to still be defending the position that Donald Trump doesn't believe Russia was involved at all. What do you make of this story?
You know, I think that the president-elect seems to be taking the attitude that this is an assault on his legitimacy of his election, and is pushing back hard on that. Now, I don't think there's any question he's going to win the Electoral College tomorrow and is going to be inaugurated as president on January 20th. But that's the only reason I can think of for him to take such a stance that is at odds with the universal conclusions of our intelligence agencies that we're hearing, that Russia did hack with the idea of affecting our election. Not every single agency, or maybe not every single official, I think, endorses the idea this was to elect Donald Trump, although there is an emerging consensus among intelligence agencies that that was the case.
There is another reason. I mean, the other reason is that he wants to reset relations with Russia. And this, acknowledging this, which becomes more and more difficult not to acknowledge, and Kellyanne Conway was remarkable and at one point insinuating that the president was not acknowledging that Russia actually engineered the hack, which of course is not true. It does make it tougher for him to move policy, I think, in the direction that he wants to move. And I think there's an enormous incentive. You know, President Obama has taken the high road during the transition, and as is Donald Trump. They've avoided personally criticizing each other, but there's enormous incentive for the President Obama to put out as much information as he can, and also perhaps to act before inauguration day to kind of create facts on the ground that the next president will have to deal with.
It was, and I couldn't quite make sense of her answer, which at one point said Barack Obama was responding against Russia for political pressure, but then seemed to suggest that she wasn't. Ron, do you think that after the electoral vote on Monday, Donald Trump, either Monday night or Tuesday morning, will send a tweet out saying the Russians hacked?
I don't know. I mean, I think there's been less difference between Donald Trump candidate and Donald Trump president-elect than you might have expected. I mean, the thank you tour. I'm watching that yesterday. The themes of that were so strikingly similar to him as candidate, still aimed at that 46% that elected him. If you look at the polling that we've had, a variety of polls, Pew, Gallup, NBC, Wall Street Journal, essentially he is in good stead with the people who voted for him. He is not getting the honeymoon beyond that is often the case for an incoming president. He's still talking to his electorate. You would think that, yes, he would do that because it is an unequivocal conclusion of the intelligence community, and at some point it behooves you to acknowledge reality, but I wouldn't guarantee it.
Susan, in our poll, 6 in 10 said they weren't proud of the president, which is another way of talking about the other portion of the country that didn't vote for him and that isn't in the hardcore camp. He really hasn't done anything. He's done the victory tour. He's done a lot of symbolic things, but not really much to get at that unity that he says that he wants in the country.
This is the other thing that I think for the Trump people, they really bristle at. The fact that a majority of Americans did not vote for him for president. The fact that Hillary Clinton won a clear victory in the popular vote, although that's not what counts when it comes to being elected president. And his failure to use this period, this is the best period he could have that's under his own control to reach out to people who didn't support him. Look at what happened in 2000, that very disputed election. The first Gallup poll after George W. Bush was clearly going to be the new president, 65% approval, 26% disapproval for George W. Bush. You look at it now, it's 48%. He hasn't expanded his support among Americans who are inclined, I think, as a people to say, he's won the election, we need to give him a chance. He's not benefiting from that, and part of it is because he's doing things like this victory tour that is designed really to rally his own troops.
Susan, do you remember the first speech after the Supreme Court ended the vote count in 2000? George W. Bush spoke from the well of the Texas state legislature, talking about how he had worked with Democrats and Pete Laney, the House Speaker, is a very different message. And if you even look at the cabinet appointees of Donald Trump, they are about unifying the Republican coalition. And while our focus has entirely been on these foreign conflicts with Russia and China during the transition, if you look at the nature of these appointees, whether it's the OMB or EPA or education or energy, we're going to have plenty of domestic conflict immediately after after he takes office, because they point toward a very aggressive move to not only undo much of President Obama's agenda, but to make fundamental structural changes in many of the domestic programs that were not, I think, at the foreground of the presidential election.
Let's turn for a moment to the President Obama's press conference. Susan, what did you make of it? He's still trying to create space and room and give the guy a chance almost to President-elect Trump.
Here's a critical question. What role is President Obama going to take after January 20th? Is he going to lead the opposition to Donald Trump's attempts to dismantle parts of his legacy? Or is he going to step back, which is what modern presidents have generally done? And I think that's a hard question to answer at this point. One thing that struck me about his news conference was how defensive he was. Defensive on whether he should have done more to publicize and push back on Russia hacks before the election took place. Defensive, as you discussed in an earlier panel, on whether he should have done more on Syria. And very much in his opening statement making the case, I'm leaving the country in better shape than when I found it, when I was inaugurated, trying to make the case, I think, implicitly against Donald Trump's argument that everything is terrible and needs to be shaken up.
That's right. So will he be Hoover with FDR or George W. Bush with Barack Obama? Being silent, basically, about Barack Obama. Ron, what did you make of the press conference? He also talked about the Democratic Party and what it needed to do.
Yeah. First of all, I feel that consistently during the transition, he is both taking the high road and giving Donald Trump a chance, but also laying the predicate to be more critical and active after, by being able to say, look, I gave him every chance. And he has said over and over again that, maybe it'll look different when you're president. And I think that gives him a little more leeway to say, maybe if it doesn't look different, that there's a reason. And don't forget, when he was in Lima, Peru, he did not rule out the possibility of being more, at the APEC, of being more visible. Look, the Democratic Party faces, an enormous challenge. I mean, they have won the popular vote in 6 of the past 7 presidential elections. No party in American history has ever done that. They have a coalition that in some ways is a majority at the national level, but it is not distributed in a way that allows them to easily control Congress, first of all, and now also to win the Electoral College. Donald Trump won the Electoral College fair and square. Democrats have to figure out whether they can find a way to talk to more non-college, non-urban voters, which is where they lost this election, or is their future more in moving further in kind of turning out this new coalition they have, which is diverse, younger, more white-collar, and more urban. In politics, the answer is usually some of both, but I've got to think there's going to be a lot of Democrats looking at figures, if not literally, like Joe Biden, who can talk to voters beyond the circle where they are doing so well.
Joe Biden from Scranton, PA. Susan, I want to ask you about Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader in the Senate. Politico had a story this week saying on some things like infrastructure spending, Schumer's closer to Donald Trump than Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader, is. What's Schumer's role in life going forward?
I think Schumer's role is to align with Donald Trump on stuff like infrastructure that he might agree with him, and which, by the way, has the subsidiary effect of dividing Republicans. I think he likes that. But he is also clearly the leader of the opposition. Democrats are divided. They need to decide who they are. They need to develop a new generation of leaders. But their clear leader at this point is Chuck Schumer, who has the only piece of real leverage they have against the president and the Republican Congress, and that is the Senate filibuster.
All right, Susan Page, Ron Brownstein, thanks to both of you so much. And we'll be right back.